throws are now on the clock. Pick's been made. Let's go to Adam Schefter to hear more about the player.
He's a Heisman-winning defender. Let me say that one more time. He won the Heisman, and he's a defensive player. Need I say more? You can imagine how well he played this season to win the biggest award in college over several offensive playmakers. The trophy was well-deserved, and according to Matt Miller, he projects really well as a defender in the NFL. I think this is a home run pick, and it's great to see a defender get some well-deserved recognition.
Falcons pick is in. Adam, give us the rundown.
Anytime you go out and dominate your peers, you're going to turn some GMs' heads. That's exactly what he was able to do in college, outrushing some of the best backs in the country, with some projected to be higher draft prospects when the season began. From everything I've heard from various sources across the league, many GMs consider him a back that can handle the ball 25 to 30 times a game and grind out those tough yards late in the game. This could be the beginning of a very special career.
The Dolphins have just made Burton their guy. Let's hear more about him from Adam.
He's a running back that has amazed and confused scouts and draft experts all season due to his inconsistent play. Some weeks, he looked like the most dominant back in the nation, and others, he struggled moving the ball past the line of scrimmage. High-level sources I spoke with attributed much of his inconsistency to a poor work ethic in the film room, specifically not reading blocks or understanding cutback lanes in favor of trying to run outside. If these reports were true, this coaching staff is going to have quite a project on its hands.
The Titans are now on the clock. The Giants are now on the clock. The Saints are now on the clock. The Saints have made their selection. For more about him, let's go to Adam Schefter.
English may not be his first language, but one thing is for sure. This kid can play. Despite only recently moving to the States, he's played American football for years and was one of the top athletes in collegiate sports overseas. He jumped at the chance to play in the NFL and used his final year of eligibility to play for a program here in America. The decision so far has paid off for him, as he was one of the most fun players to watch in college this season. And now his dream has been fulfilled, landing on an NFL team with this pick. But the journey has just begun, and we'll see what this European phenom can do in the big leagues.
Now that he's just been picked, Adam, tell us more about Pierce.
His final season in school came to an end early when he was dismissed from the team after missing several practices. I wasn't able to find out why he couldn't attend the practices, but I do know that after his third absence, the coach finally decided to bench him. He was on his way to having a decent year, but without him participating in practice, the coaches thought he would be a liability in the game plan going forward. After apologizing to his former teammates, I can see why this team is taking a chance on him. He seems recommitted. We'll see if that's true come training camp.
The Bills are now on the clock. The 49ers are now on the clock. Our very own Adam Schefter has more to say about this pick.
Matt Miller and a number of other scouts told me he was their favorite offensive lineman to watch at the All-Star game. Following a great senior year, he came into All-Star week looking like one of the better lineman prospects this year. And right from the start, the coaches challenged him using blitz packages and other stunts to see how he would react. He handled everything that was thrown at him and not once looked overwhelmed or gassed from the extra attention. Todd McShay tells me he looked like a dominant force on the line, keeping the quarterback clean and opening holes for the tailback to run through. He should be a great fit on this team's offensive line and possibly a day one starter.
Cowboys are now on the clock. The Buccaneers are now on the clock. The Chargers are now on the clock. The Redskins are now on the clock. The Colts are now on the clock. The Jaguars are now on the clock. The Jaguars have made their pick. Adam, what can you tell us about him?
A veritable interception machine, he holds his college's single-game record for interceptions in a game, snagging 3. Scouts pointed to an almost sixth sense when the ball was in the air, and Matt Miller had him ranked as the top defensive back in the draft in his final mock. True lockdown defensive backs are few and far between, and this is a pick that should solidify this team's pass defense for years to come. It'll be very interesting to see if opposing offenses go right after him, and how if he shows any rust after being avoided for much of his final year in college.
The Panthers are now on the clock. The Bears are now on the clock. Eagles are now on the clock. The Raiders are now on the clock. Adam, what can you tell us about the Raiders' newest player?
One of this draft's toughest players, here's a guy who played the majority of his final collegiate season with a broken foot. Long suffering with plantar fasciitis in the affected foot, doctors discovered several hairline fractures across the first, second, and third metatarsals during a routine therapy session. Translation? His foot was essentially shattered. Recovery took months, and he used the time wisely, studying film of just about every NFL team and preparing for interviews. No surprise that he blew scouts and even a few GMs away with his knowledge of NFL offensive schemes. This is an intelligent, hard-nosed defensive back who's going to make his fair share of big plays before his professional career is over.
The Cowboys are now on the clock. The Cowboys are now on the clock. The Browns are now on the clock. The Chargers are now on the clock. The Cardinals are now on the clock. The Falcons are now on the clock. All right, let's go to Adam Schefter, who's got more on this pick.
No receiver had a rougher outing at the All-Star game than he did. Even though he was targeted plenty of times throughout the game, he came away with a giant 0 on the stat sheet. When I asked Matt Miller what the issue was, he told me there were several problems. For one, he never seemed to build chemistry with the quarterbacks on the roster. The timing of the throws, in combination with his routes, made each pass a difficult one to bring in. He also seemed to be the most tightly covered receiver, even though they cycled through different defenders each drive. He had a difficult time adjusting to the faster play and rarely got separation from the corner to make an open field grab. Regardless of his issues, the fact that he was drafted tells me the team wasn't concerned with his play at the All-Star game. Maybe a little consistency is all he needs.
Rams have just made their pick. Adam, what can you tell us about him?
He's one of the few receivers in college that no matter what sort of coverage you threw at him, he always came away with the ball. A great example is one of his impressive touchdown catches that has been on highlight reels ever since. It was late in the game, and the defense knew who the quarterback was going to target. He was surrounded by 3 defenders when his quarterback put the ball in the air, and even though he was completely swamped, somehow he managed to pluck the ball right over the defenders' heads. He isn't the biggest receiver, but he has the ability to stretch and make the play, essentially making him a larger and taller target and a real threat in the red zone. I think this team got a possible difference maker at receiver.
The Texans are now on the clock. The Titans are now on the clock. Titans have made their selection, and it's English.
He's a gifted tight end who had scouts buzzing to begin the season. Just as the hype surrounding him was hitting an all-time high, he was plagued by a series of critical fumbles, leaving draft experts wondering what went wrong. Sources tell me that after the season ended, he began working with a sports psychologist to help curb the fumbling issues. He performed well at both his pro day and at the combine, but has yet to demonstrate his grip on the ball after contact. Clearly, this is a team that feels the fumbling issues are behind him and are confident his upside far outweighs any of the potential risk.
The Ravens are now on the clock. The Jets are now on the clock. The Bills are now on the clock. Adam, what can you tell us about that last pick?
He was a great runner in college, but a combination of his size and lack of elite speed had some scouts not entirely sold on him being a great pro prospect. He beat the odds and is getting drafted here, and I think if you go back to his pro day, you'll see why. Matt Miller wasn't sold on him until then, and he told me it was the way he performed in each drill that changed his mind. The kid competes and competes and competes some more. His effort levels at his pro day were through the roof, and the numbers he posted tell the story. The team wasn't willing to pass him up, and I think it made a wise decision to go with its gut and take him.
The Steelers are now on the clock. The selection is Thornton. Adam, what do you think?
Matt Miller told me to look at a certain stat in regards to this defensive back, and that's average number of targets in a game. Not surprisingly, you see that number start to fall each week. He was a master of the bait and switch early in the year, on track to break records midway through the season. Eventually, quarterbacks gave up altogether trying to throw the ball in his direction, essentially taking away a receiver on every play. There's going to be an adjustment period now that he's in the NFL, but he certainly has the potential to be a shutdown defender for this team in the future.
The Jaguars are now on the clock.